Good.
Hi, everyone who's joining us. We have a really important conversation on tap here for the next hour. And as people cycle in, I'll just take the moment to thank SPJ New England for hosting this conversation tonight and for getting 5 national presidents in a Zoom room together. No small feat given everything that's going on in the world these days. I'm Matthew T. Hall, the national president of SPJ, and really looking forward to talking to my fellow journalists and presidents here today. And I'm going to just kick off the mic for introductions. And this is really more of a conversation. I mean, SPJ is hosting this, but I'm really looking at this as a free-flowing conversation among peers on a super important issue. And we'll take audience questions. So as you have them, please drop them in the chat and we'll answer your questions. And Nora, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good evening. I'm Nora López. I'm president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and I'm also executive editor at the San Antonio Express News. Thank you so much for this forum today and for the opportunity to discuss this really important issue. I think you were asking earlier about some of the challenges that we're facing, and I'd have to say that one of the big ones that's facing our group in particular right now is colorism. It's one that's even been in the news a little bit lately with the new movie by Lin-Manuel Miranda, In the Heights, who he actually apologized for not having enough, hardly any Afro-Latino actors. So that's one that's sort of been bubbling up for us as a group, and that we're still trying to figure out how to better address it, because I know it's an issue that NABJ has discussed for many, many years, and it's finally beginning to surface as a big topic of conversation for our group.
Yeah. Dorothy, Nora mentioned NABJ. I think that's a segue to you and your organization.
Yes, I'm Dorothy Tucker. I am the president of the National Association of Black Journalists and an investigative reporter with WBBM TV in Chicago. Now, I think that we probably face many of the similar circumstances as NAHJ with our members in terms of colorism. But one of the things that I think our members are concerned about is what we publicly see in terms of the number of hires and promotions, the big jobs, the new president of ABC, the new president of MSNBC, LA Times, the Miami Herald, all of these great big jobs that we definitely appreciate, that we definitely applaud those companies, but it's the lesser known newsrooms, it's the smaller newsrooms. It is the non-networks in particular that our members still have very much the same complaints that they've had for years. We sent out at one point, I think in late January, February, we asked our members to email us and share with us their complaints, what was going on in their newsrooms anonymously, or they could give their names and we would follow up. In a few minutes after everybody introduces themselves, I will read to you some of the responses that we've received. And it's very revealing of what's going on today, despite some of the changes in the calls for diversity that we've seen.
Michelle.
Hi, thanks for hosting this conversation. It's great to see the fellow presidents here. It's always great to hear from them and their experiences. My name is Michelle Ye Hee Lee. I am the president of the Asian American Journalists Association, of which I've been a member since I was an 18-year-old college freshman. I am the incoming Tokyo bureau chief of the Washington Post starting August. So I'm actually packing right now. Box is not in the screen. Among the key challenges facing Asian American journalists today is something we've struggled with all along, which is a chronic feeling of invisibility. And this is something that is very felt throughout the Asian American community as well. We are still underrepresented in newsrooms. In many newsrooms, our AJA members are the only or one of very few Asians in the newsroom, and they are still very underrepresented in leadership positions, as shown by the constant NLA data of newsroom leadership. When the big jobs came up this year of the major newsrooms, as you know, we've had top leadership turnover in a number of top large newsrooms this year. We really saw a lack of AAPI journalists ready to take on some of the highest profile positions throughout the news industry. And it's not just the top newsrooms, similar to what Dorothy mentioned. It bleeds into some of the coverage and the way that we are able to or unable to cover our community fairly and accurately. And we've seen this with the rise of violence and harassment toward Asian Americans tied to COVID. In many cases, our journalists were the only ones pitching the story, even if race wasn't their beat. AAPI is not their beat, but they're the only ones asking their newsrooms to cover it. Oftentimes they're asked by their editors, what's the newsworthiness to this violence? What is the news peg? Tell me how urgent it is. And this is the constant struggle that our journalists face because they are not seen by their newsrooms and not in those leadership positions. So this is a constant conversation among our journalists and our members about how to overcome this and make sure that we are able to accurately and fairly represent our communities through our coverage.
Thank you, Michelle, and congrats on the bureau chief position. Francine.
Anine, I'm Francine Compton, and I'm the president of the Native American Journalists Association. And I'm also the associate producer for a news unit here in Canada called CBC Indigenous. And it's very unique in the fact that it is the only news desk for Indigenous news and Indigenous journalists at any mainstream outlet in Canada. And I can also say that I do have all of these things are resonating with me that I'm hearing from fellow presidents. So, there's been some achievements. As I just mentioned, I work for the national broadcaster here in Canada who has national Indigenous news coverage. And I'm seeing a lot of the diversity initiatives going on here and the results of the actions, I'm seeing them on air. I've also seen a lot of trends over the last, it's coming up on 22 years for me in the industry this month. And I started my career as one of the only Indigenous reporters pursuing these types of stories and asking questions that the people wanted answered. So that for me is really what speaks to why we wanted to get together today and the impact that this lack of diversity has in newsrooms, the impact that has on the information people receive. And it has been over the span of not just my 22-year career, but prior to my time in the industry, I can tell you that my father, he was the first visibly Native man on television news in Canada. And that really was a catalyst toward many things. It was also something for me that I saw myself reflected in somebody on television through my father who looked like me, but not just him, but also through the female anchor who was anchoring the local newscast. So those two things worked really hand in hand for me, that diversity, because diversity is not just regarding heritage, it's regarding every facet of the diversity that we have in our communities. So it's important for me to speak on behalf of my people and that career that I basically started from that young age, being able to see somebody and being able to have hope that I could be a reporter and I could get a job in this industry. And another thing that really helped me, and it's really where I spent most of my time, and that's with the world's first national Indigenous broadcaster, which is APTN, which is also based here in Canada. This is a national network providing news and current affairs for Indigenous people by a majority of Indigenous people. So these are things that have happened here. The work that I'm doing with the Native American Journalists Association is to see a lot of that happen in the US. Currently, there are no national reporters on television who are from Indigenous backgrounds. And, you know, we recently have had quite a experience, I want to say, in working with CNN. And most recently, the biggest thing for us to work on for our organization was on election night in November, when CNN chose to amalgamate Native American voters into a category, and they chose to call it something else. And based on my experience and my time in the industry, that is a mistake, and it's an error, and it should be corrected in the same way and platform that the mistake was made. The thing about the teachings that I've received from my father is that those mistakes are gifts that are given to broadcasters, and we have to view them and take them for the gifts that they are, and learn the lesson from within those. So, you know, we actually went so far as to discourage our members and Indigenous journalists from working for CNN, because we did not believe that it was a safe place for our colleagues to go and work. If I could say that in the few minutes there, that's really what brings me here today, and why I want to speak on this issue with my fellow presidents.
Very powerful, and I appreciate that advocacy for all of your groups. And you know, SPJ is here to amplify all of your voices, and you know, under the notion that a rising tide lifts all boats. That's kind of what we've been trying to do at our organization. You know, through our partnerships with NAHJA convention and raising some of these issues. Francine, you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, Michelle is talking about stopping API hate and this more recent phenomenon that the country is grappling with. And obviously we've all been focused on the racial reckoning post George Floyd. But if you think about diversity in newsrooms particularly, ASNE in 1978 said that by 2000 there would be parity in newsrooms, and that people of color would be working in newsrooms at the same percentage thereabouts as reflective of the general population. Clearly we all missed that deadline, and now it's 2025 and we're nowhere close to that. SPJ's code of strategic plan actually says and suggests that newsrooms have percentages, that they share their demographic data for all to see. Not that that's the be all and end all, but reflecting a community helps to better serve it. So I guess I just ask, you know, let's start the conversation when Francine's talking about decades of work. This clearly is decades of work, and will be too many years work, I think, in the future. But where do you all stand on this notion of demographic data, sharing it? Do you think that that is a helpful step? Is that part of the equation? How effective is that, do you think, in newsrooms? Anyone can jump in. This is just a conversation. So
yeah, I think it would make a huge difference if we could have the data. I mean, every time we meet with a manager, you know, a CEO, a publisher, or all of them, we ask them to share their diversity numbers. We want to know how many Blacks in particular, and other groups as well, are in their newsroom. We want to know how many are managers. We want to know those who really have position of power, or those who just have a title. We've asked for that number of times over the years. And many times we get pushback. You know, and what's interesting to me is that, you know, those who give us the excuse of, well, you know, there are legal reasons that we can't do it, there are competition reasons that we can't do it, they give us excuses. You know, as journalists, we know that data is king. You know, in order for us to know what needs to be done, what needs to be improved, we need to have the base numbers now, so that 6 months from now we can measure success. So it really frustrates us. I will tell you that we actually started counting once, and I think we came up with maybe a couple of dozen companies that have released some data. And we really applaud those companies that have done that. And there have been even a couple of companies that have really just kind of gone through and given, made all those numbers public. And, kudos to them. There are so many more who haven't. And, to the rest of them, we are really kind of saying, in order for us to really make some, to measure success and to really kind of improve upon diversity, we really kind of need to know where you are.
Mhm. Mhm.
I agree. I mean, you just got to have, how can you even start a conversation if you don't identify that baseline to begin with? It used to be that newspapers in particular participated pretty regularly in ASNE, but I don't think they've done now one in a couple of years. And as Dorothy said, it's been hit and miss with some of the companies that as journalism groups that we've gone to talk to. Some have been more transparent than others. But we absolutely need that information in order to be able to monitor, whether there is improvement or not. And as, again, as Dorothy says, it's not just about, in the reporting ranks, but also in the decision-making roles. How many are in management positions where they can influence, the type of stories that are being covered or not. Because that's something that a complaint that we get from some of our members, that they pitch stories and they're told, oh, that's a Univision or Telemundo story, which is always just amazing to me, because you would think, they'd want to seek a share of the Latino market with its growing economic power. Why wouldn't you? Why do you classify all stories as one station over another, especially when the Latino community is so diverse and there's so many Latinos who don't even speak Spanish? So I don't understand if their pocketbooks won't help them do the right thing. It's, they obviously haven't been doing the right thing just for the right reasons for the last couple of decades. So we need a measurement tool.
Yeah. What is that measurement tool?
Well, among things like that, a good accounting of how newsrooms, not just, I speak a little bit more confidently when it comes to newspapers, because that's my background, but we especially need it across all our platforms.
No, I think something like the FCC. I mean, if you remember years ago, there was a requirement that broadcasters in particular, and broadcasters because of the FCC, had to report their numbers. There was kind of like an oversight. And then I can't remember what administration it was, but somewhere along the way, broadcasters no longer had to report their numbers. They no longer had to talk about whether they were balanced or not. Everything just went away, and they haven't. So, we're talking about it in NBJ, establishing a relationship again with the FCC, going to the FCC and discussing putting some teeth back into that agency so that they can do a better job of overseeing the broadcasters in threatening and challenging their licenses to make sure that they do diverse programming, and that more importantly, that there is diversity in their newsrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's just to build on that, we should, like the FCC, we should really look at other levers that we could lean on to provide that mechanism of accountability. For example, there was a letter sent by the Congressional Asian American Pacific Caucus last year asking all the major broadcast companies for the same data that we're looking for. And at the state level, some state houses have been bringing in executives in hearings, state house hearings, to learn more about the state of diversity in their companies. And I think those sorts of efforts among public officials to try to learn more about the company's demographics and diversity initiatives could be one aspect. Of course, like as journalists, we would be covering that, but it's good to know that there are parallel tracks happening elsewhere, and how we could kind of add that transparency to the companies in whatever way possible. Another mechanism that I think is useful, and it's a little tough because our members are at every part of their career. Not all are just in the rank and file, but we've seen some opportunities to collaborate with unionizing efforts at certain companies. A lot of our members are members of unions of their companies, and they're seeking the same data, and they're finding ways to use, whether it's public records that might be available or some sort of internal demographics gathering or collecting efforts that are happening, and they let us know what they're working on, and opportunities for data collection that way. So we've seen some opportunities there, but absolutely accountability and mechanisms to get data are a really big challenge.
I can resonate with what each of you are saying, Nora, in terms of story selection there at a national broadcaster with another unit for coverage of diverse people. And, one of the reasons that there was able to be a national Indigenous broadcaster here in Canada is because it was done through the licensing and the campaigning of individuals and a Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples studying why and what needed to be done to make the lives of Indigenous people in Canada better. One recommendation out of that Royal Commission was for a national Indigenous television network and to include news on that network. And so that led to the creation of APTN. So when you're talking about the FCC needing to regulate and mandate, I relate to that, and I see the effects of how that has resulted in a national broadcaster here, but also the public broadcaster also bringing diversity of all backgrounds into the reporting and into the language. And when it comes to having senior executives, the language is absolutely important in determining what you as a media outlet are going to publish and how the public is going to perceive what you publish, because there's so much negative and possessive language out there that is being published and broadcast when it comes to reporting in Indigenous communities. We have had to issue a statement regarding the New York Times and how they covered Inuit communities in Canada and how they called it Canada's Inuit, and how, they relied on stereotypes in their reporting. And one of the resources we have at NAJA is a bingo card that I used when reading that article to determine if there were stereotypes in there. And I not only won bingo, but I found a way to make more words appear on the bingo card. So, it is up to not only the journalists that we represent, but our organizations. We're really monitoring, and we have our pulse on the industry as a whole. And we have had to do the work. We have had to dig up the data. We have had to commission reports, media spotlights. We did one last year. We're coming out with one this year. And in the particular media spotlight that we did, we had our researchers look at the diversity and inclusion of a particular organization, and it never mentioned Alaska Native or American Indian Native American journalists, which led our researchers to believe that there were no journalists of those backgrounds working for that outlet. So, the work is being done in just various little pieces. It would be nice to see it being done more broadly, and by, seeing the work be done by the regulators who grant licenses, both on TV and online.
That's an interesting approach. Is drilling down at a federal level. The polar opposite approach is on a local level, And my day job is as the editorial opinion director of the San Diego Union Tribune, where we have a very active journalism community. And the SPJ chapter is actually working with some other groups and surveying each of the news outlets in town and asking for their demographic data. The idea being that those who share it will, they'll publicize it, and those who don't, they won't publicize it. They'll shame them into not for not responding. I know that there's an NAHJ chapter in Los Angeles where they're doing the same thing in the Los Angeles market. Is this something that's better done at a local level, or that's done in addition to kind of federal involvement in action? I mean, how effective can that be? And I guess the flip side of that, the problem is when there's not a really strong journalism community, a one newspaper town or a news desert, like, how do you hold outlets in those communities accountable? What would y'all say to that?
Well, at NABJ, it's interesting you should talk about shaming those companies that don't respond, because that is something that, we've talked about just so that we can get the numbers and the data that we need. In 2012, we did an unscientific poll, a survey of the television stations looking at Black managers in particular. And the reason we did that, we had to do it on our own, and we had to, and literally in every city, at every station, find somebody in there to go in and count the numbers, because we could not get the data. And that is something that we may have to resort to again for newspapers and for online publications, for all of it, just so that we can get the data that we need. We're going to be polite first, and we're going to send an email to everybody and ask them and hope we get the numbers. When we don't, then we are going to do our own reporting. I think it's better to do it on a national level so that, we can see what the picture looks like. I mean, because like for you, the LA Times owns your paper as well. So we can look at every newspaper within that. Or Scripps, I think Scripps owns like 181 television stations, and they tend to be in the top 50 markets. So, we want to look at all of them. It's going to be a cumbersome task, true, but I think it's an important one, and it is one that it's a project that we are committed to doing, just so that when we sit down with news managers, we can say to them that, no, these are the numbers we have. Now, if the numbers are wrong, please correct us, but because we couldn't get, this is what we're seeing, and this is the concern we have, that at this station, you do not have one Black executive, at this newspaper, you don't, the highest ranking Black executive is only at this level, and we want to be able to have some more conversations with them where we have facts. Mm-hmm. And at some point when we answer this question, I do want to read, I mentioned before.
Let's hear those real world examples. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So and these are what we did in late January. We reached out to our members and said, tell us what's happening in your newsrooms, in your world. And we got a number of responses, and they keep coming in. And I just literally pulled 3 of them out of the few dozen that we have. And I'm just going to read, quote, and obviously not give you the particular newsroom. So this one says, several newsroom co-workers and I have been working to engage our broader organizations in conversations about DEI. There hasn't been much interest from leadership, so we've been pressing forward on our own. But earlier this year, I tried to engage my general manager in a conversation about how blank station could become a more inclusive organization. I pointed out as an example that our Public Advisory Council is comprised entirely of white people, and that blank station, that the majority of the staff are white, but my GM dismissed those concerns. Then we have one from, take a look at the blank pages and note the issue with diversity, mostly white faces across all media, despite the demographics of that market. few Black faces in many of the markets, even where there is a significant Black population. This one was interesting. I am a white male and I quit the blank station in blank city because of their refusal to address blatant racism in the newsroom. The assignment manager from his first day made inappropriate comments about female talent. He repeatedly called Black Lives Matter a terrorist organization, made disparaging remarks about Hispanics, and made anti-Muslim comments. I reported all of these, but the news director refused to acknowledge a problem. That gentleman goes on to say that he quit. And when they came to him and said, well, you know, what can we do? He said, make some changes. And they wouldn't commit to that, so he left. And you know, others talk about pay disparity with minority reporters, photographers, and producers. Caucasian colleagues are making more money than minority women, African Americans, and Middle Eastern backgrounds. You know, it is one of those things that, you know, quite frankly, you read and it just, it tears your heart out, you know, the disparities that go on in the newsrooms. And again, you know, on the one hand, we see so many promotions, you know, and we are seeing, and I am hearing from more managers who are looking for Blacks in top management. You know, they are looking to fill those positions with Blacks, and I so appreciate that. But on the other hand, I've got a stack of reports, you know, from our members who are in pain, quite frankly, because of what they are still experiencing. And they are looking at this racial reckoning and seeing these changes and still writing to us and saying, no, we still need help in this particular city. We need help, you know, getting our managers to recognize us, to listen to our pitches, to respect us, you know, to treat us fairly and to pay us equally. So,
what is the, short of leaving and making a point that way, what are some, you know, what do you tell your member organizations that members can do now, today, if they are in a newsroom where there's not managers who are receptive, maybe they don't have DEI training, who, to Michelle's point, you know, there's a sense of invisibility, perhaps. I mean, what do you tell a rank and file journalist or even a manager who's in a news outlet that there isn't enough being done? How can they pressure that organization from within?
from within.
Up,
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say by speaking up, I think we're starting to lift that veil and folks are starting to feel braver about speaking up and telling the truth of what's happening in their newsrooms. We had a pretty high profile case earlier this year that began with 3 members of our group who spoke out, wrote a story about what was happening in their newsroom. News 9 in Denver. This was Lori Lizarraga, Christian Aguile, and Sonia Gutierrez, and they shared some really horrific instances of how their workplace was toxic. You know, and it was not just exclusive to Latinos. In fact, many, Dorothy, Michelle, and Francine and I, we've had some conversations as it relate to this because we were hearing about, you know, other similar instances of racial discrimination across the board at this particular station and at others. But, you know, just things like, you know, lightening headshots, you know, lightening the skin color on headshots, makeup tips to, you know, make their eyes look more Western, asking reporters to disclose their immigration status. I mean, that's just unheard of. So we've had some of these tough conversations. I think almost all of us in our various groups have had individual conversations and really, you know, bringing it to light and talking about it because that's the only way to put any kind of pressure on these organizations to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think what everyone is getting to here is just how systemic and deep-rooted these issues are and how they've not gone away, even though our organizations have been working on these issues for decades and decades. And I think that's it's been especially important for us to all work together on this front. All of these issues that Dorothy and Nora had just raised, I know Francine and I are probably like just like nodding our heads, being like, our members say the exact same thing. Pay inequities, lack of representation, you know, they're told they look too Asian and they can't look that Asian. And it's consistent. And part of the power that we have as our organizations and working together is the power of numbers. And the thing is, if one journalist who's of a marginalized community is being treated unfairly, inequitably in the newsroom, it's likely that other journalists, other minority journalists in that newsroom are being treated that same way. And the more that we can empower our members to disclose some of these experiences as generally as possible, because we also want to protect them and make sure whatever we do is not exposing them in a dangerous way. But that sort of data collection that Dorothy is doing with her organization, that Nora is doing, that we're doing as well, and Francine too, you know, we are working to take these snapshots of the state of these newsrooms and how they're treating our journalists, and then taking that information as documented as possible. Oftentimes it's anecdotal, unfortunately, but we're trying to reveal that and bring those stories to the executives and say, do you know this is happening in your newsroom? Do you know that they've tried to raise it to you? Because we're able to have those one-on-one conversations with executives in a way that our members can't. So that's the work that we do, the cover that we try to provide for them, the voice that we give to them in ways that they can't as an individual in a newsroom. Organizationally, we can back them, we can come together, we can support them in ways that one individual member cannot. And you know, the more that we can do that, the better, because again, this is a systemic issue, and unless we address it as a systemic issue, we can't talk about it in a meaningful way. I mean, too often these issues come up, like some sort of diversity crisis happens, and then newsrooms like throw money at it or hire some diversity team or race team, and then they move on because they see it as a short-term problem. But that's why long-term progress doesn't get made, because there is no long-term commitment, no long-term investment. And that's why we're here to make sure that they do see it as a long-term issue.
Let me answer directly your question about what do we tell some of our members, Matthew? Because to Michelle and Nora's point, there have been times when we all have gotten together. I'll tell you that in a minute, but sometimes what I say to our members is to find your white allies within your newsroom. Sometimes, you know, that person at a television station could be the main anchor who you can go to and express your concerns, because they will have the power and the voice that you may be afraid that if you say something, you're going to get retaliated against. And I've had members who have expressed that kind of concern and fear to me. They also don't want us to come in because they're afraid that they're going to get retaliated against. So to them, I said, okay, you need to find that person in your newsroom who has a relationship with your boss that you can ask, go to them and you say to them, I'm having this issue. What advice would you give me to deal with this particular issue? How should I handle this person or that person or this thing that is happening to me? And they will most likely then say, you know, let me talk to the boss on your behalf. And I've seen that be successful with our members. Other times I've told them, if you've got 4 or 5 who are all in the same space with you, and sometimes not just your Black colleagues, but, you know, reach out to your Asian, your Native American, your Hispanic colleagues, all of you get together. And then you go to the manager in mass and say, hey, we'd like to sit down and talk to you. There was one time, and Michelle, I don't think you were president at the time. I'm not sure, but Nora, I'm sure you weren't. There was a particular company that is owned, media company that is owned by an outlet in Europe or something. And a representative asked all 4 groups, and Francine, it may have been before you as well, asked all 4 groups to sign on. And these are our issues, and we are afraid to go to the big boss. And in that case, you know, I took their letter and I said, and I sent it to the main owner and said, Houston, you have a problem. And you really might want to listen to these folks because they've gone out of their way to join forces and to detail every issue that they have. But they are afraid to bring this to you, and they have come to their respective organizations and asked for our help. So here's a letter, and probably within days, I heard back, I got a call, from this person, and we talked, and they then took steps, and eventually, we saw some positive change come out of it. So, to Michelle and Nora's point, our organizations make a difference. We do matter, and we are respected voices, and our members need to remember that we are here to advocate on their behalf. We will do it.
And we reflect our members. We reflect their experiences, both in real life and in the industry. And that's really one of the reasons I'm okay with putting in so much work and using my voice. And I think that's what I would want to tell our members, that you have an opportunity to use your voice, and we're here for you. And you need to know that there were people before you who were also doing what you're trying to do. And they may have had a harder time because they were doing it when there was only maybe 5 of us. Now there's 50, 500, 5,000. And we need to be there for each other. The trailblazers that came before us, we need to learn from them. And we need to learn from the people who are here in this Zoom session right now, who are doing the work in front of and behind the scenes. And I'm really proud to be part of this panel because each organization uniquely represents a unique group of members. And those members are signed up because they believe in the work that the organizations are doing, the programs that we're providing, and the advocacy that we're also doing in the name of journalism. I would also tell members that we are all in this for journalism. All of us, everyone in the newsroom, we are all in this for journalism. We all want to break a story. We all want to do a live hit. We want to be the anchor, or we want to, be the top story at 6 o'clock on the local or the national. We all have those passions. And I think if we can start speaking to each other in a language that we can relate to, and language that I believe senior executives can relate to, is that those numbers that we talked about earlier, and that the communities that they are serving, they need to be reflected in those newsrooms, or the communities aren't going to tune in. They're not going to subscribe. They're not going to pay for next month's cable bill or the next month's subscription, because they're not seeing themselves in the photos, on the bylines, or on the cameras. And that's what I think is really going to start getting senior executives to be hearing these things, that it's the audiences that aren't being reflected. And perhaps the audiences could, join in that vocal sense. But there are good things going on. And I think each of our organizations are uniquely pushing needles forward. And we can always point to good models and to say to the CNNs or the New York Times or whatever media outlet it is that we're, in talks with, is that there are models that they can actually follow with proven actions and results that audiences are attracted to.
I love that. And I love your focus on the community. I'm wondering what we as organizations or as an industry, we talked a lot about in the last 45 minutes about what we can do internally, but how about looking externally? How do we build a bridge with our audiences? How do we expand our audiences? How do we reflect our audiences? What can we do in a diversity, inclusion, belonging lens to work with our audience? Like you're saying, Francine, what steps are there that we can all be taking and should be taking that would make for a stronger community, not just a stronger newsroom?
I know that some organizations, and the first place I really heard this idea was the Pointer Institute, where you're really connecting your newsrooms to the communities that you are reporting in, then the communities that you're trying to reflect. I think there should be more direct connections between newsrooms and journalists and people, citizens, communities. Those are the folks that we want someday to go to journalism school and take our jobs one day. And if we're not able to connect to them and attract them to the industry, then we're going to lose that cycle of story gathering and news telling and doing it for the sake of our communities to have a voice on national platforms, and also for the political aspect to it. Many people in our communities will not have that chance to ask their local politician or their national politician, perhaps even the president, a question. And that's the conduit that we're able to be. So I really do believe in that connection to the community and being the voice for the community. And those are the best stories. And they're also the stories that change lives for people and communities and change policies and government as well.
You know, people want to read stories online or in the newspaper about their community. And, you know, they like reading those stories that have been written by people who look like them. They like watching television stories that are presented by people who look like them. So, you know, if you're talking about how to better serve the community and how to increase your readership, increase your audience, you know, it is critical that you write stories and you present stories about the community that really reflect what's going on in the community. And I think viewers and I think readers are really smart. You know, they're very astute. They see right through the same kind of stories that just always talk about what's going on in the suburbs or in the white communities or in communities where they don't live. You know, and if you keep opening up the newspaper or going online and you never see anything about something that's happening in your community, then at some point you stop clicking. You stop watching. So it makes sense. And it's not just the right thing to do, it's the sensible thing to do. It's a smart thing to do, you know, to make sure that you are serving the community. And the best way to do that is with diverse reporters, with diverse voices that bring a diverse perspective so that you are covering everybody.
Yeah, and I think especially during this time when the trust in media is so low, I think it's important to think about diversity and inclusion in our newsrooms and in our coverage as a matter of trust, an issue of trust in media. Lack of diversity, lack of inclusion can contribute to that mistrust that our audiences have toward our institutions because we're not serving them right. And when we don't serve them well, then they don't trust us. They don't have a reason to come to us. So I, at least, you know, to our members and to the institutions that I talk to, I try to frame it as a matter of trust in media because it being seen, our audience is feeling seen through our journalism and our journalists goes a long way. And I think the more newsrooms can see the value in that and understanding that it is a long game between the relationship that we build with our communities, with our audiences, through the great work that our journalists do because they're able to help our audiences feel seen, our communities feel seen and represented and heard. That is how you build trust, rebuild trust among people who have left us, who no longer watch us or read us for whatever reason. I like to think about diversity and inclusion as kind of similar to misinformation and disinformation, where you don't get rid of misinformation through one initiative. And it's really easy to give into misinformation and disinformation. You have to keep working at it. You have to hire people who can, fact check and really do good work to make sure that our audiences are well informed with the right facts. It's the same way with diversity and inclusion too, I think. It's a constant effort. It's not something that one person can fix or one initiative can fix. You have to keep working at it. And it's hard. It's really easy to be lazy on both of those fronts. But the more you do it and you do it well, then it's worth it for your audience and your viewership, your subscribers. And another tangible thing that I try to tell our members and other journalists is when you get feedback from your community, bring that feedback right up to your managers and your executives, show them, forward those messages back to your editors and say, look, we gained a new reader because of this story, or look at what this work is doing. Show off, show your work. And it's not just like being selfish, it's actually showing the impact of your work that it's having on your organization. I mean, what manager doesn't want to hear that your story brought in new subscribers and new readers or new viewers? Bring that feedback right back up to the management chain and show the impact that you're having. And that's kind of like a tangible advice that I try to give as well.
Bottom line, Matt, if you want a successful newsroom, you've got to be representative of the diversity of the population. And that means gender, sexuality, disabilities, ethnicity, it's all of that. I know somebody in the comments was asking if we were including LGBTQ communities. And of course, yes, we do. Because when you get that kind of a newsroom that is representative, then you're just going to get all these different perspectives. You're going to capture more nuances, and you're going to diminish your blind spots. So, all around, it's the best recipe for a successful newsroom.
Another thing I want to say that can happen within the corporations and companies is there are some unique employee resource groups where I work, and I'm really proud to be involved in a lot of the movement that's going on this front. But there are employee resource groups. I happen to be the co-chair of the Indigenous employee resource group. It's called All Nations. So every Indigenous employee from the corporation is invited to be part of the group. And for me, I view it as a mini version of the Native American Journalists Association internally. And there are, I want to say, over a handful of these groups within the Canadian public broadcaster here. There is a group for LGBTQ. There is a group for disabilities, people with disabilities, Indigenous people, and also women in technology. So each group is there for each other. And I've heard a lot of good feedback from the other groups from people saying, I felt like I could be my true self. It helped me be my true self, not just within the group, but within the broader corporation. So when I said that there's models out there and things that can be pointed to, I've been really lucky in the previous workplace and in the fact that it was a national Indigenous broadcaster. 70% at least was staffed by Indigenous people. And now I'm in a corporation that's implementing really good initiatives that I am seeing results on the air in the local, the national newscast, the 24-hour news channel. These are all of the platforms that the national broadcaster here offers, and I'm seeing the trickle effects. I'm also seeing how seeds have been spread from having a national Indigenous broadcaster, because a lot of people did start out there and those seeds spread to other mainstream networks. So it is really important for all of those projects to be, put in place and to be fully utilized. And those options for people getting together within organizations, they really truly can work and build toward changes.
It really is about mindfulness and intentionality and commitment. To Michelle's point, it's a long-term process.
And measuring.
One of my great frustrations is hiring managers who say, well, but only white people applied, or like, oh, it seems like such a cop-out and so lame when people, so I guess speak to that group, to give them advice for how to ensure a more diverse applicant pool, a more inclusive process. What can they do in terms of crafting their, their language, reaching out to groups? Like, let's talk to that. Let's put that group on the spot right now. And how would you reach out to them?
It's recruitment. It's simple recruitment.
Yeah.
I mean, let's start here. You look at when there's a position available, they post that position on Career Builders, they post it on LinkedIn, Indeed. They have a budget, but they don't spend that money. Too often they don't. And what we try to remind them is that in a HJ, in a BJ, a JA, in a JA, in a JA, we have career centers. You could post those jobs in our career center as well. So that's the very first thing they could do. I mean, for any BJ, if they merely posted the job, they'd have access to 3,000 or 4,000 Black journalists. They could go in, filter it, say, I'm looking for somebody who can spin a top and write a story at the same time, and they would find that person really very easily. Now, that's the simplest thing to do. And what we've done to make it even easier for them is we have created databases within that group. So if they want producers, they can just go directly to that database. If they want editors, we have one. If they want freelancers, we have one. They can filter for sports. I think it's just a matter of, I don't know whether some don't know. I don't know whether it's just easier to go somewhere else and not think about them. But let me say to them right now, you're recruiting, come to us and post your job where we are if you want to hire us, which you should want to hire us because you need us, okay? Number two, they really need to sit and take a look at why and ask themselves the question, why is it that we only end up hiring people who look like us? Well, that could be the issue, that you just keep hiring people who look like you and going to the same network that you've always gone to, and you've never expanded beyond that network. So to those middle managers, who take the easy way out and go, okay, I've got this position. Let me call my friend John, and then John calls Joe, and Joe calls Paul, and down the street, and then you get somebody to get the same kind of looking person. You've got to expand that inner network as well, because we're in your newsrooms. Just think of some other people of color that and ask them. You could probably get some diversity that way. I will let my colleagues throw in some. There are lots of them, and I know they have them too.
Yeah, I think the recruiters and hiring managers intentionally building their own network of potential candidates is so key, and we don't see that being done enough. But if you really want to attract the best talent into the newsroom and you work on it and work on those candidates, then you're going to be looking out for people from all sorts of backgrounds who can make your newsroom vibrant and more diverse. And you're going to want to hire them eventually for the right job. So, too often recruiters come to like me or to AJ and say, hey, can you send over some, Asian candidates for this job? And I'm like, why do you not have your own network of diverse candidates that you want to recruit and are clamoring to bring to your newsroom? Don't you want that? Don't you want that Rolodex for yourself? Isn't that your strength as a recruiter? It's kind of like editors who have freelancers. If you have freelancers who you can trust and would be good for certain stories, and that becomes your strength as an editor because you have this trusted network of freelancers, people who are good for your coverage. I think if recruiters and hiring managers kind of thought about it that way, if they can look out for talent that they eventually want to recruit and try to cultivate them into people who would be a good fit for your newsroom, then that's good on both ends too, because you're investing in someone's career, you're investing in someone's path, and you're also becoming that recruiter who can bring such great talent into the newsroom, and that becomes your asset and a strength as a hiring manager. And I think the more recruiters kind of see the benefit of actually putting in the work, putting in the investment into candidates, I think that would be a real game changer.
It's a mixture of both things, seeking us out as organizations for some help and developing your own list. And it's amazing that you have we'd have to tell people, you know, do your job. You should always have a list of talent that you're keeping an eye on. And if you're doing your job, your list is diverse. One of the other little pet peeves that I have that I hear a lot is, well, we just want to hire the best candidate. And it's like, what do you mean? You know,
Yeah.
If you have two candidates and they have the same level of experience, both have strong clips, but one of them is going to make your staff more diverse, then why doesn't that fall automatically in that category? So I hate it when I get told, well, we're just looking for the best candidate. Well, that doesn't preclude you from looking for the best diverse candidate. So my 2 cents.
Well said.
I gotta say to not just the corporations, but to all in the industry, be a mentor and plant a seed. Meet with us and invest in our programs so that we can help plant seeds. Invest in programs and partner with universities to recruit, because the training needs to start from the ground up for those qualified diverse candidates to get from, you know, start to up a couple levels. And you know, I say be a mentor. You know, don't ignore the intern in the newsroom. Talk to the intern in the newsroom. Take them under your wing. Try to teach them and you know, just talk to them on a level where they don't feel intimidated. I think that a lot of us make this job look really daunting, and we're all in pursuit and we run on tight deadlines, and there's a bit of an adrenaline rush that comes with that. So I think we need to make these spaces really comfortable for young people to enter into them so that we can mentor them, see them go from a researcher to a reporter, to a producer, to an executive.
Yeah, I'm glad someone brought up interns, because that really is a huge place to devote our resources and energy. When we hire interns the last few years, we started working with the local chapters of SDABJ, SDNAHJ, and also SDA, the Hispanic Journalists, which actually being in San Diego and bridging Tijuana actually represents both communities, which is amazing in and of itself. And then the local Asian Journalists Association. So again, mindfulness is key, and interns is a huge, huge place to start for sure. Let me work.
It has to come from the top, Matthew, though.
Uh-huh.
It has to come from the very top. You know, that owner, that CEO, that publisher, they can make it a mandate, you know, that you will do what you have to in order to get diverse candidates in order to get increased diversity. You know, if that message is sent, and sometimes if that mandate is tied to your bonus, I bet you figure out how to get a diverse hire. Oh, and I think that sometimes that may be necessary, but you know, if there's kind of a constant watch and a follow-up that says, okay, so, you know, but you need somebody now. No, but you don't have a diverse candidate. We'll take another couple of weeks. Take a couple of weeks and keep looking.
Yeah.
You know, that commitment has to trickle down from the top.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate to work at a place that does value all of this. And one of the things we haven't touched on is sources and sourcing, and how the people that you talk to and the people who, we kind of got into this a little bit, you know, seeing yourself reflected in the news content that you read. At the Union Tribune, we've actually told reporters, take 4 hours every 2 weeks and broaden your source list. And oh, by the way, we're going to audit our sources. And so we're going through a process now to make sure that, you know, we are trying to get not quotas, but make sure that people are reflected in the community in our pages. And I think that's those two acts, you know, broadening and diversifying your source list, and then actually making sure that you are super important. I don't know a lot of newsrooms that do that. That also could go a long way in other places.
Wow, that's fabulous. I like that idea. I'm going to steal that, Matthew.
Steal it, please.
I'm
All
going to
these ideas
suggest
are
that to
borrowable.
as many managers as I possibly can. That's a great idea. Glad to see you guys doing that.
We've boosted, we've gone over our hour limit. And the other pressing question that I have for y'all is, when is Unity gonna restart? We're reopening. That's a heck of a party and accomplishes a lot of the goals we've been talking about. When are we gonna do that again?
Well, I think we're beginning to, we are forming relationships. We are working together on projects. NEHJ and NABJ. We've had a couple of conferences together. I think we're together again in Las Vegas in 22.
Yeah, next year.
22.
Mhm.
Michelle and I, we hosted a webinar a couple of weeks ago on Asian Black relations, and that was a really good joint webinar. And we're talking about doing some other joint projects, because we do recognize and we do know that we have a lot of similarities, and we are definitely oftentimes battling the same, fighting the same battle. So those are conversations in terms of how we can join that we are having.
Yeah, the capital Unity may not be around, but lowercase Unity has always been here. And I would say, I'd like to call it solidarity now, maybe just to inject a little bit of a different word. But this has been a really great partnership, throughout many years, and we will continue to work together and find new projects to collaborate on.
One of the things that I've appreciated during the pandemic was sister organizations inviting our brothers and sisters in for free to our Zooms. And that, I just think, to what you two just said, that goes a long way. You know what I mean? Solidarity is the right word. Yeah. Well, with close, I don't know if any of you have closing thoughts or if there's issues that you want to add that we didn't. It was a fast hour. We could go for 2 or more, and I'm sure we will have ample opportunity to talk about this. What's I guess the last question? What do you think of the outlook? Are you optimistic? Do you feel like the last year plus post George Floyd has, and the light that's shown on newsrooms, are things getting better or not?
I'll take that. I think things are getting a little bit more hopeful. I feel like the last year with the racial awakening, I feel more sense of an urgency from some media corporations to step up and try to do better on their D&Is. We're hearing of groups who are starting, D&Is, and certainly it's not the end all be all, but as the point we've been made, you've got to have a starting point. So, dusting up those D&Is, reviving them, creating new ones, it's the beginning of that conversation that needs to be had. But on a personal note, I think it is working. Our local group applied a lot of pressure here in San Antonio, did some audits as well of TV and our newspaper. And just in the last 2 weeks, the San Antonio Express News, previously our masthead only had 3 white men. 2 weeks ago, they added 4 women, 3 of us Latinas. Myself, I was promoted to executive editor. So there's things happening, and I'm very proud of that. I started at this paper as an intern 34 years ago. So it can be done. Si se puede.
Well said, and congratulations. That was, the masthead is very, very cool. Well deserved.
I'm definitely want to say that I'm optimistic, and I think that there's a lot of catching up that needs to be done south of the US-Canada border.
Mhm.
And I would like to be able to tune into a television station in the United States and see myself reflected on those channels, and bring the voices in, the sources, the voices into all news coverage. Indigenous, Native American people, we're not just there on voting night. We're not just there when someone wants to change a mascot. We're there and we're interested in all of the issues that affect people and that are covered by news.
Mhm. Beautiful.
For me, I think the jury is still out I am hoping that this is not the recent hires and high profile hires and promotions that we're seeing is not just a reaction that will soon stop. I applaud those who have, made some significant strides and have made some significant hires, but I just want to make sure that it's not just window dressing. I want to make sure that it continues, and it continues throughout the newsrooms, and that we continue to stress the importance of looking at the culture of the newsrooms, looking at the disparity issues like pay equity. And I don't want us to lose sight of that just because there are newspaper headlines and and statements and announcements of some new historic hire or and again, while I applaud that, I'm sitting back and I'm watching, and I just want managers to know that I'm watching very carefully, and I have no intentions of just standing by and letting this just be a moment for now. I want the work to continue.
Yeah, I think we are all hopeful and optimistic people on this front. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this work and trying to make things better because we believe it can be better. But I am also wary, and I like I said earlier, oftentimes these moments, these concerns get treated as a short-term issue, but it is a systemic problem. This year AAJ's 40th anniversary. We were founded in 1981, so we're doing a lot of looking back at why we started, how far we've come. And the short answer to that is, our members felt invisible and they came together to change that. And 40 years later, we still feel very invisible in many ways. And we're very focused on making sure that 40 years from now, things are different in ways that we can see and feel and then that are visible. So, I'm hopeful, I'm wary, and I will be working even harder to make sure that this progress lasts and results in concrete and permanent change.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. We're not going to top that one. I mean, the bottom line is there's a lot of work to be done, but there would be more work to be done if it weren't for your organizations and you individually and journalists collectively fighting for representation, diversity, inclusion, belonging, all of it. Thank you guys for being gracious with your time tonight and for all the work you did. We should get the presidents together more often. It was a stark but empowering conversation, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to
Thank you.
SPJ New England for hosting us all. See you guys.